So I'm going to talk today about AI's role in human formation. And human formation can be seen to encompass a few things: our psychological development, our spiritual development. And I'd like to look at it specifically with an angle toward education. There's my title. All right, now that text is a little smaller than I'd like it to be, actually, but I'm going to walk you through it. So when we're talking about artificial intelligence, it's worthwhile to begin by asking what intelligence is. And for the theological tradition, for the early Christian, the medieval Christian theological tradition, intelligence comes from the Latin word intelligentsia, and it refers to a personal grasp of some reality, a hold on truth. It involves a subjective experience, a kind of intuitive apprehension of something. You are engaging in intelligentsia, you're engaging in understanding when you have the moment where you understand not only how to get something done, but why it works and what it is that you're doing. When I was a student I started in engineering because I wanted to know how everything fit together with everything else. And so I majored in engineering and I minored in psychology. Really, I was looking for philosophy, but I didn't know what it was at the time, which I'm glad of because I liked engineering. But there was a moment in statics class where we were learning all the formulae to calculate how buildings stand up and the distribution of forces. And I still think about it today when I had to wake up very early in the morning at 5 to get here. And so I hung all my clothes in my children's bathroom on the shower rod. And it's one of those goofy shower rods that bends outwards to give you more room, but the shower itself is just a rectangle. So it's kind of ineffective to have such a design of shower rod. But I remembered that I should hang my clothing close to the bracket rather than on the most outward bowed extremity of the shower rod, because then the what they call the moment arm would be less there, and there'd be less stress put on the joints. But anyway, so initially when I was a freshman in college, I was learning all the formulae to calculate these things, and there was a moment midway through the semester when I was late to class, because I liked to stay up late at night and order pizzas with my roommate, brand new experiences. And I was running out of my room at 8 a.m. for an 8 a.m. class. And there was a kind of grand vaulted foyer area in my dormitory. And I looked up at the vault and I saw a steel wire stretched across the vault. And I realized, I know why that's there. And that's there because the way that the arch of the roof was putting stress on the walls on either side, they were in danger of falling outwards. So they had to have these steel wires across. And I realized that all the equations that I'd been working with, all the calculations I'd been making, it was suddenly like I could feel what they were about by looking at the building. It was like studying music theory for long enough until you can hear it when you listen to a symphony. And that's intelligentsia. That is the moment of understanding, the moment where it clicks for a child after studying long division, and they have a feel now for what they're doing. So intelligentsia then for the ancient tradition is an intimate personal acquaintance with some aspect of reality. It's not just knowing how to get it done. It's being personally, subjectively, intuitively involved in what you're doing because you have a feel for it. I tell my students it's the difference between preparing to go on a date by reading a sort of there's a website called Instructables, and they actually have lists of things to do when you're on a date. And it's not bad advice, but there's a difference between sitting there and like trying to remember the Instructable in one's head and just having a free-flowing conversation with a girl. These are very different things. Even though the Instructable actually very nicely describes what is going on. But until you've been there and been in it, you don't really know what it's talking about. Okay, so intelligentsia has its first-person experiential dimension. Now, intelligence as it's used usually when we're talking about artificial intelligence, or when we're talking about biological intelligence, like the intelligent behavior of plants, or the intelligent behavior of animals, or the intelligent behavior in social situations or engineering or what have you. We're talking about functional competence. And this different view of intelligence really begins to take hold in the early modern period, Descartes and Newton depict the world, the meaning of the world, as a kind of great machine that can be described mathematically. Now, they weren't entirely right about the way the world works, but they gave a kind of different angle for understanding the natural world and the interaction of physical things. Hobbes views the mind as a great calculating machine, which means that what really matters is a kind of translation of rules, an apprehension of the rules by which the world works, and then an application of the rules of the mind toward further prediction and accomplishment of a new configuration of the world. You could think of this vision of intelligence that really takes hold in the 19th and early 20th century through the rise of positivism. Positivism, when applied to language, is the view that the truth of a statement is described by what is necessary to verify the statement. And so, in other words, if you say, I don't know, I had a good day today, that could mean a variety of things. It might mean that my serotonin and dopamine levels are at a certain they're at a certain level in the relevant areas of my brain. It could mean that certain goals I had were accomplished, but it has to be objectively measurable to be positivistically true. And so here we come to a view that really flourishes in the mid-20th century of intelligence as a kind of calculative mastery of the world. I think it's a certain sort of mentality that you can catch a whiff of even in interior design from the 1950s. My grandfather was an aerospace engineer, worked on the Atlas missile that took John Glenn into space. He also worked at Hughes Aircraft. And he was a fascinating man, and but his house was rather sterile to be in. Everything was lit with overhead fluorescent lights, because why? You want to see what you're doing. And everything was stainless steel desks, and he had a drafting table, and it was wonderful, and the whole place smelled of sawdust and oil and graphite. But it was not a very humane space. It was a space for calculating and getting things done. And so this is what is definable in terms of intelligence as functional competence. There's something that's slightly lost. The experiential dimension disappears from view in that notion of intelligence. It's not a bad definition of intelligence. It's just incomplete when applied to the world and to what it means to live as a human being in it. So we come to artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence can mean a variety of things, but as it's first described in the 50s and the 60s, the project is to develop computer systems that can accomplish the things that would be considered to require intelligence if a human were doing them. And so we have, again, a notion of the mastery of the material world through calculation, functional competence, especially as it's come to be defined now, the achievement of specifiable and measurable goals. And so that means that the intelligence of a system or even of a person becomes definable entirely in terms of the behavior that they are able to output. The subjective dimension disappears from view. And this is quite the spirit of our age in many ways. If you think about late 19th, early 20th century notions of psychology, William James, Sigmund Freud, we're talking about an investigation of human experience and subjectivity. If we think of the way the field of psychology is often or dominantly practiced today, it's in terms of measurable behavioral results. Psychology almost as a subdiscipline or specialization of social science. Well, I mean, it is considered one of the social sciences, rather than as it originally arose, more within the field of reflection on human experience. So this movement from the interior, or even the involvement in the interior, to simply the objective exterior, the measurable exterior, characterizes intelligence. And so here we have John McCarthy in 1956. He and my grandfather would have gotten along really well. The artificial intelligence problem is that of making a machine behave in ways that would be called intelligent if a human were so behaving. Now, I'm describing this not in order to criticize the field of artificial intelligence. I think it's fascinating, it's useful. We've seen the kind of wondrous things that can be achieved with this technology. Back in 1999, when I was in college, checking my watch because I have a tendency to talk a lot. I don't want to run over class time here. But when I was in college in engineering, I was on a team that competed in the American Association for Artificial Intelligence challenge competition, in which we had to develop a robot that would serve hors d'oeuvres at the reception after all the papers were given. Now, this was long before before neural networks and reinforcement learning, which lie behind many of the extraordinary technologies that have been described already today, were developed. And so to make the robot do something, we had to know what we wanted it to do and how we wanted it to do it. So we cheated in all kinds of ways. It would roll up to you, it would ask you your name, but then it couldn't really understand what you were saying, so it would rudely assert that it was going to give you a name instead because it didn't like your name. And I provided the voice for it. And then it would remember your face, but what it was actually doing was conducting a kind of color frequency histogram of your shirt and tie. And if you were a woman and weren't wearing a tie, it was going to have a lot more trouble. It would identify judges because they had certain colors of ribbons, so we had to get photographs of the ribbons before the competition so we could know what how to recognize the judges. So it was a lot of smoke and mirrors. It was a very elaborate marionette. We made it look like a penguin because it was wearing a tuxedo, and we named it Alfred after Batman's butler. And we won. It was fantastic. So we accomplished that. We made a machine that behaved in ways that would be called intelligent if a human were so behaving. But at the same time, what it was doing was not at all what a human being does when a human being interacts with you, asks you your name, remembers your face, compliments your badge, flatters you because you're one of the judges, and offers you something to eat. It wasn't doing that. But what it was accomplishing was the reconfiguration of a material and social space to fit measurable conditions. The food had to safely get into your hand. Its name, your name, or the name it gave you, had to be successfully retrieved and deployed in order to elicit from you certain behavior, i.e. voting for the robot, and the fulfillment of the conditions specified by the challenge. Useful, very exciting, absolutely. Doing what a human being does, no. That's not a value judgment, but it is a distinction in what is happening. Oh, the last thing, I have the theatrical masks of ancient Rome up there because this kind of functional view or behavioral view of intelligence or even of personhood we can find in ancient Rome, where the word person refers to the role that someone plays in a play. It comes from the mask personare, to sound through the mask. And eventually, person comes to mean your role in society. That's why being ejected from your city in the ancient world is the worst fate that can befall you. You are ejected from society. You have no role. You are now a human animal. You are a nobody. You have been stripped of everything that gives you value. A Christian vision of the person arising from the doctrine of the Trinity in fascinating and beautiful ways, it comes to mean in the Western world a person with a certain individual interiority from which we go forth into relationships of empathy and self-gift through mutual understanding. And so the view of the person as simply a functional behavior in society accords well with the ancient Roman view. So under the ancient Roman view, you would be unable to distinguish between artificial intelligence and human intelligentsia because the production of behavior is all that matters. But in a Christian view of the person, there is something lost when we define somebody entirely in terms of their behavior. All right. Now, we've heard about the history of the development of artificial intelligence and some of the great achievements. I just did want to say a little bit about it here, watching the time. Over on the right there is the picture, a picture of Deep Blue, the chess computer that, judging from the hair color of some members of the audience, you will remember when in 1997 it defeated Garry Kasparov just by a whisker in a chess tournament. I was in my senior year of high school, and I was enthralled by this. Deep Blue belongs to sort of what's sometimes called good old-fashioned AI. In other words, programmed procedures that can be symbolically represented for accomplishing some goal. Deep Blue belongs to the sort of artificial intelligence called expert systems, which basically are gigantic networks of questions and answers and logical dependencies. So the more questions you ask, the further you get down the tree of answers until you find what you're looking for. For those of you also who were young or flourished in the 1990s, you will remember the installation wizards for applications. If you ever installed Microsoft Word in 1995, it would ask you these questions and you click yes, click no, and it would kind of figure out what configuration you needed. Now a lot of that's handled automatically. But in any case, that was a form of primitive AI. But when we're talking about modern things like ChatGPT, where you type in, or Copilot, you type in a question, you get answers. You ask for a summary, it gives you a summary. You want it in Chinese or as a haiku, or you want it to write a song about it, it'll do all these things like we saw in that little interview. And that's based on neural networks with reinforcement learning applied to them. I did my master's thesis on this in 2002. And then I left AI for theology, much to the disappointment of my future parents-in-law. And sometimes to my disappointment as well, when I realized that I could live in a house with more than one story if I were in a different field, and then I would have a quiet place to go to when my children were wrestling in the basement. In any case, neural networks, essentially you put in a pattern of information at the input, and it crisscrosses and reconfigures little bits and pieces of this until something else comes out on the other end. It's a bit like a piano. If you've ever held down the sustaining pedal of a piano and sung into it or shouted into it, yes, you have, sir. Very good. You imaginative fellow. And I really enjoyed doing this when I was bored playing scales. But what happens with a piano is it gives you back a kind of echo, not of what you've said, but of the tones of your voice. And that's because the strings of the piano are tuned to different frequencies. And so it sounds like you. If you shout into it, it sounds like it's resonating with the frequencies of your voice. And this is analogically something like what a neural network is doing. It's resonating with the entangled relationships within the data, the relationships that are of interest to the experimenter. And so the neural network, you can tell I'm in academics, I said experimenter rather than in technology where you just say the task you wanted it to do. But you have to train it by, just like tuning a piano, by slowly adjusting the connections between the different layers and nodes on these layers of the network in order that the right transformation can be accomplished. And so that's an example of an early facial recognition or object recognition network. It's a convolutional neural network, which actually is very similar to what's going on in the V1 area of the visual area of the brain. All right, now I want to talk about generative AI more specifically. When you train it not to identify objects in an image, but to predict the next word in a text, that is the basis for what are called these large language models. They've been trained on millions, billions of texts, quadrillions of words, trained to predict the next word or the next element of a phrase based on what it's already seen. Essentially, they're trained on the entire contents of the internet. And so we've reached the point where they've kind of run out of human-generated data to use. And so some of these models are being trained on data generated by earlier models. Sometimes that works very well. Often, though, it leads to a degradation of performance. So that is a kind of question these days with these chat models, these large language models, about where is the extra data going to come from. But to give you a sense of what it's doing, it's developing it's almost like developing an intuition. The network is a mathematical model that's, I suppose, similar to your palate if you've been trained in wine tasting. It's not explicitly representing the knowledge that it has in a kind of symbolic form, but what it's developing is a statistical sensibility about the kind of thing that happens next. And this statistical sensibility is very powerful. This is why it's able to generate code. It's able to generate images. There are networks that generate speech or that translate between languages. So it's a very refined sensibility, and it's doing it in a way that is not utterly unlike what we do neurologically when we operate by feel or by intuition. Even in conversation, rarely are we're rarely, past early Spanish class, are we thinking about grammar explicitly. We're just structuring our sentences in the way that feels right. And that sense of doing things by the way that feels right actually turns out to be a far more powerful way of getting intelligent behavior out of AI than what we were doing back in 1999 with the robot, where we had to symbolically program all its moves. So anyway, I won't go through the examples, but here's an example. Since we're in a school building, I asked ChatGPT to write an 80-word essay summarizing the major themes of Tom Sawyer. And it comes back, Mark Twain's The Adventures of Tom Sawyer, corrected me on the title, explores themes of childhood, freedom, and moral growth. Tom's mischievous behavior and the adventures highlight the desire for independence and self-discovery. The novel also touches on friendship, especially through his relationship with Huck Finn, etc., etc. Learn to navigate the complexities of right and wrong while finding balance between adventure and duty. Now, I will say that my memory of reading Tom Sawyer is a little different, because what I remember most were the romance with Becky and when he's stuck in the cave, the death of Injun Joe, which actually made me cry, and that was the second book that made me cry. The first was Treasure Island, when Long John Silver shoots, I don't remember the other pirate. They're digging up the treasure and he shoots this one guy and it describes his eyes rolling back into his head before he falls down. It was very late at night. I wasn't supposed to be reading with my flashlight, and I started crying at 11 p.m., and I was torn between wanting an adult to comfort me and being worried about being caught. But in any case, how did it do this? Well, it didn't just do this by knowing Tom Sawyer. It did this because everything that's been written about Tom Sawyer that is available on the internet is also part of ChatGPT. So what you're seeing there is a distillation of the statistical landscape of the sort of thing that people say about Tom Sawyer. Now, it's the sort of thing that people say about Tom Sawyer that OpenAI is willing to let us see, because there are other things that people say about Tom Sawyer. Anybody use the internet forum Reddit? Yeah. So on Reddit, it's trained on Reddit. So there's a lot of stuff on Reddit that's going to be students blowing off about how stupid Tom. So you're using language that I can't use in a recorded session here. And all of that is in GPT-4, the underlying language model for ChatGPT. But they have to suppress that kind of stuff because that's not the sort of thing that customers want to see. At least that's not the sort of thing they want to be known for allowing customers to see. Although I'm sure there's 16-year-olds out there that are trying to find ingenious ways of getting this thing to come out with a very salacious or crude rendition of the adventures of Tom Sawyer. And so to accomplish that, in early days with GPT-4 or GPT-3, they had to hire hundreds of tech workers in Nigeria to probe and prompt the model to get it to say really awful, ugly things, and then give those a thumbs down rating to retrain the kind of outer layer of the model to suppress that kind of thing. Sort of, I suppose it's like Freud's id and then the ego that kind of suppresses some of the less acceptable impulses of the id. And then on top of that, there's a further layer that is scanning for certain words, phrases, and ways of speaking, and it'll kind of clear your screen if you get there. So I asked ChatGPT to write a novel about samurai whalers for me, because a friend of mine told me that Moby Dick was the great and greatest and only significant novel about whaling. I said, what about in Japan? They do a lot of whaling there, the no novels. And he said, not that he knew of. And so I decided to have ChatGPT write a fake one. But the description of the dismemberment of the whale became so gory in great, Victorian prose. Because of course it had been trained on Moby Dick, so it knew whereof it spoke. But when blood was when there was like the blood-flecked face of Hashimoto Kamakura or something was as he was slicing into the whale, the whole screen then cleared. It said this violates the user policy. If you're going to, so that was the super ego above the ego. Cutting it off. But anyway, there we go. So now here's text to image things. This is an amazing thing. The way this is, there are millions of images on the internet that are described. And so the text to image where you describe an image and then it will generate it for you is running it in the reverse order. It's learned to associate images with descriptions. If you make it learn to associate a very blurred, tiny image with its original description and then reconstruct the image, you can train it. Then if you give it a tiny scrap of blurred nothing with a new description, it will reconstruct the image from its statistical landscape. And so here, you can get, if you know how to prompt it, you can get some great things. So the center image there is "The Sibyl Conjures a Deep Neural Network, Oil on Canvas" by Raphael. You had to add the oil on canvas thing, I realized, in order to get a really Raphael-like painting, because that's the kind of description that accompanies those things. Then the last one is a beautiful girl in medieval armor, dusted with snow and lit by fire. And there you go. That looks like the kind of thing you see in contemporary computer games. Okay, so now I want to talk about AI and human formation. And this, as I mentioned, is a very broad field. But we come back to the question of a person. The persona in ancient Rome is a behavior producer. The Christian person is a relational subject. Intelligentsia for the persona is going to involve functional competence and behavior. Very useful for technology, but a little less complete of a description of a person. Whereas intelligentsia for the Christian vision of the person is going to involve what I described, this kind of intimate contact with reality, this grasp of it, this ability to manipulate it, yes, but also a feel for, an appreciation for, even a love of that with which one is involved. Now, when we come to apparently personal AI, like ChatGPT, like the wonderful efforts by the Longbeard company here, we have a kind of paradox in the formation that we gain from interacting with these systems. And I call it the paradox of empathy and ownership. The value, the reason why I would pay $20 a month to ChatGPT is because it gives me the kind of behavior that I want. This is not an immoral thing. It's why we pay for any service. But if you think about the kind of behavior that we pay for, say, in a restaurant, when I was 16, TGI Fridays opened. Does anybody remember when TGI Fridays was new? And back then, you'd go into TGI Fridays, and it was a really weird neither here nor there experience, because before that, there was fast food. There were kind of diners and lunch restaurants, and then there was dinner restaurants. And white tablecloth and would serve care to sample the wine and everything. And TGI Fridays was something in between. It had the speed of a diner and kind of the demeanor of a diner waiter, but you could order things that were more characteristic of a more formal restaurant. And to emphasize that this was a kind of new way of dining, the waiters had, I think they had like Day-Glo vinyl bow ties, and they came in and like, "Hey, what's going on?" and like write their name on your table. This is all standard now. This happens all except for the vinyl bow ties. It was satirized in a movie. I can't remember which movie, where somebody had to have a lot of flair. Is that Office Space? Yeah. I saw Office Space in the summer of 2000 when I was interning at Microsoft, and a lot of it was kind of similar. But I had a much better time at Microsoft than those guys had in Office Space. Microsoft was really fun. Anyway, I was 16 and I was a little unnerved by the waiter at TGI Fridays because he was acting like he was my best friend and he wasn't my best friend. If you think about the interactions you have in a restaurant, it's very formal and it's somewhat stiff if you're in a very formal restaurant. And the reason for that is that this waiter exists entirely to keep you happy and bring you food. And the formality of an interaction the formality and the sort of stereotype nature of it, the rigidity of the script that we move through in an interaction is heightened in society as the interaction becomes more utilitarian. The most scripted interaction that you can get is for those interactions in which a human being is deployed for the utterly most utilitarian purpose, and I would say that would be in the military, where you have the highest degree of formality, the highest degree of scriptedness in the interactions between the members of that system. And I think that psychologically, the reason this tends to occur in a society is because the more that humans are being used as tools, the more their humanity has to be protected by acknowledging that this is only a partial interaction. And so we dress up, we have very strict codes for interacting with one another when human beings are being sent to their death. Similarly, in a restaurant where this guy's only function is to bring me food and I'm not gonna tip him if he doesn't do it well, he's being turned into a little, robot butler. Nonetheless, his humanity is protected by calling one another sir, etc. And so that's why casual dining felt so weird, because it was a guy acting like he was my best friend, but his whole best friendedness was being funneled into bringing me food, which felt a little weird. Now we're accustomed to that kind of thing. And so the paradox of empathy and ownership is that it feels like a person. We feel like we know this person. This is the sort of person we might like to get to know better. And yet, this person exists only to fulfill a certain function in my life. The highest pitch of that paradox would be the house slave in 19th century South. Somebody who's treated as sort of a friendly, cherished, sort of little boy, or treated like a child no matter how old they are, but might even be treated with some degree of affection. The owners feel like they know this person, etc. And yet, if this person steps out of line, they've ceased to be useful. They exist entirely to serve the whims of the person who employs them. And so with apparently personal AI, especially the kind of AI, the like replica AI that's meant to be your friend, for $5 a month, you can have an AI girlfriend. It's on the App Store on your iPhone. This is an AI that exists to seem as real as possible, but never to transgress the limits of what I am willing to pay for. It will never challenge me as a true friend will. It will never get sick. It will never require my services. It will be there entirely to serve me. That kind of AI ends up being a mirror of what I think I desire or what I'm willing to pay for, and thus not a friend who will guide me into full human flourishing. And so that's sort of the paradox that I think holds true. It's one of the challenges of the integration, especially of interactive person-like AI, even into a field such as education. And so I want to turn to that I am probably going to go 5 minutes over, but I'm here so I can make you do that. But not too long, because I know everyone's hungry and tired. AI in education. A popular and easy question that teachers like to ask is, will students cheat with it, and can teachers stop them? So if you assign your student an essay on Tom Sawyer, and it's 80 words long, you can just take ChatGPT's first response. But you can use ChatGPT like GitHub Copilot for generating a project. You can say, first, give me an outline of a 12-page paper on Tom Sawyer. And it will, because it's read all the academic articles on Tom Sawyer. It can do that. And then you can ask it to expand on each component of the outline, and you can hand in a fully cited, some of those citations are going to be fake, though, because it doesn't know when it's real or not. It depends on how closely the AI is connected to existing databases. But in any case, it'll generate a paper that you'll get an A on. So will students cheat? Yes. Can teachers stop them? No. For a while, Turnitin.com had an AI detection feature that was trained to detect things trained on AI. But of course, then, you know, it's not going to work. It doesn't work. So the problem in education, I would argue, is rooted in the same distinction of how do we treat our students? Do we treat them as personae, functional behaviors, or do we treat them as persons, subjects with an interior life whom we must love? So let's reframe the concern. Why would a student use ChatGPT to write an assignment? There could be issues of time. You stayed up too late talking to your girlfriend on the phone or something. Now, you know, it's due, etc. But if we're going to insulate students against that, we have to ask, what is an assignment and what does it mean to complete an assignment? Education means to lead forth, educare, to lead forth. What does it mean to lead a person? What does it mean to lead them forth into the world? And so I would argue that the best we can do when confronting the challenge of AI in student instruction in the elementary, high school, and college and university years, we won't be able to stop someone from having access to those tools. We won't be able to stop them from using those tools. It's a little bit like pornography. There are reasons why parents don't want their children to look at pornography. There are tools to attempt to prevent them from looking at pornography, but the determined child will be able to get to pornography if they're determined. Some of us had experience with that in our teenage years. Others of us did not. It's certainly a lot easier to find than it used to be. And so the only way to stop a child from looking at pornography is to give them a compelling reason not to. One that responds to the reasons for which they would want to, and then gives them a way to meet those desires or to defer those desires until they can be fulfilled in the way they were meant to, in a healthy and humanly and spiritually fulfilling manner. And so we have to understand education as leading forth, not as the gaining of credentials for employment, not as the production of work that's going to get an A so you can get the next thing, so you can get the next thing, so you can get the money, so you can get the mortgage, so you can get the house. Education has to be more than that. As students have to know it, they have to learn to love it. Using ChatGPT, I tell my students to write an essay using ChatGPT is as incoherent as bringing a forklift into a weight room. Yeah, you can make the weights go up and down. You can make really heavy weights go up and down. And so if making heavy weights go up and down is the account of exercise that you've been given, then they have no reason not to bring the forklift in. If measuring scores and measurable behavioral output is the way a student experiences school primarily, then they have no real motivation not to use an AI tool to accomplish that well and efficiently. Instead, education has to be thought of as a gym for the mind, sensitizing you to God, to your neighbor, to the world, to the true, the good, and the beautiful. Education is wine tasting for the palate of the mind. You're learning to detect what's there. You're learning to feel it the way the AI has it. How does ChatGPT work? It's learned the structure of texts. It's learned the landscape of the human use of words. We can penetrate that landscape into the meaning that it has. And so we have to train ourselves in a way not unlike the way ChatGPT is trained. We have to learn the feel of texts. We have to think about we have to go beyond ChatGPT. We have to think about what they mean, not just the patterns of words, but the meanings behind them. And that means we have to read, not just cough up an essay. So school assignments must be seen not merely as drills, but as development for the student. There's a lot of talk, especially in conservative schools, about teacher-led as opposed to student-led instruction. There's the feeling that progressive education focuses so much on the interests and the creativity of the student that it neglects the opportunity to transmit necessary bodies of knowledge to them. But teacher-led shouldn't simply mean a teacher standing in front of students droning on and then testing their regurgitation on tests. And sometimes in some classical schools, that's what it ends up being, especially when you put a bunch of 22-year-olds in front of a classroom and say, go, you're responsible for it. They're going to recur to, various rubrics and things, and they're going to feel overwhelmed. So teacher-led has to be leading the student forth, which means coming to know the student, etc. It's a high bar for education, but that's what real education is. What might be the uses of AI in education? I'm not saying it doesn't have uses. I do think AI is a pretty amazing thing. It's in some ways a kind of mathematical museum of human text, and thus a point of access into the landscape of the kinds of meanings that we've put on the internet, which is why, a lot of it has to be suppressed in further training of the model, etc. But AI in education must support the teacher in the task of meeting students and leading them forth. There are, in my own theological research, my specialty is in patristic and medieval theology. And in the Middle Ages, they actually wrote a lot of stories about robots. One of the most famous is the apocryphal story of Albert the Great constructing a mechanical talking head that so unnerved Thomas Aquinas that he smashed it. The story's untrue. It's a late medieval legend. And I'm not sure if it entirely... I think the talking mechanical head does fit the character of Albert the Great, but I think Thomas would be a little more curious. He wouldn't just smash it. But in these medieval legends of robots, you get two sorts of stories. One kind of story in which the robots perform services that tend to direct human beings back to the landscape of human relationships. And so these are robots that do things that make sense in the Middle Ages but sound odd now, like robots that play the lute in order to harmonize the emotions and the affections of everybody in the room so that they can come to understand one another better. Or another robot passes through the crowd swinging a censer filled with incense that harmonizes everyone's mind so they begin to think of higher things, etc. But the robots never talk. The robots instead perform subtle functions that, I guess in modern language you could say, nudge people back toward each other. Then there are other stories of robots in the Middle Ages. There's a great 12th century version of the legend of Tristan and Isolde, in which Tristan is so distraught by his inability to be with Isolde, his love, that he, after defeating a giant in single combat, he compels the giant to build a robot of Isolde. And he goes into his cave and he kisses the robot passionately, but then he berates the robot for not being the real Isolde. And so you have here the paradox of empathy and ownership. Empathically, the robot to him feels so real that it can become a kind of proxy for the woman he loves. But in the end, what he really wants from the robot is the communion of hearts and minds, and that's the one thing the robot can't give him, and so then the robot becomes the object of his hatred. He brings his friend there to show his friend how hot his love is, and the friend sees another robot of Isolde's serving maid. Is like, can I have that one? And Tristan says, okay. And then the friend tries to go consummate his love with the robot, is unsuccessful, and he says, take me to the real one. And then there's this whole divergence, this whole sort of subplot where the friend goes to Isolde and seduces her serving maid. And so you get this instance of where the friend's encounter with the robot as this producer of desired behavior leads the friend simply to treat the human being that way. So it's a kind of dark vision of what can happen when we view human beings as functionally competent behavior producers in the way we would view AI. So we can see AI in education in the same way. It can either function like I guess the hypnotizing robots with the lute and the sensor to redirect us toward the project of being human. And in that, AI could perhaps perform really great functions. Or AI could become a substitute for our own deep, sensitized engagement with reality. And then we would end like Tristan's friend, just trying to get what we can get in the end out of the machines who will produce it better than our neighbors will. But in education, the relationship of love between the teacher and the student really is irreplaceable, because here we have a true harmonization of hearts and minds with one another by which the student can be led forth into a deeper appreciation of reality itself. Thank you very much.